G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a fairly quick video on rifle or barrel twist. Basically going through some of what it basically is for the people who don't understand or haven't run into that yet. And the second half of the video a little bit about some of the more complex issues to go with it in a very layman form. First of all, barrel twist, yes. There is rifling inside a barrel on firearms that shoot bullets. All bullets, not slugs, not darts, not other things, all bullets need twist. Why do they need twist? Well, they need twist because they are fundamentally not stable. They don't travel through the air in a stable form. To travel through the air in a stable form, you need to have a tail. You need to have something to create a center of gravity and a center of mass, a balance between the two to make something go straight forward. Here's something that is aerodynamically stable. It's a dart. It has a tail on the back of it. It has weight in the front of it. It has a point. It means that it'll travel through the air where there is the tail, which creates drag, and there is the weight at the front. So when you throw it, it'll flow forward through the air pressure, holding it straight. It'll keep going forward. So that's a dart, and while it's got forward motion, enough forward motion to create drag, it'll stay stable traveling through the air. There are slugs that have tails on them, so the Diablo shape of slugs in air rifles and in some shotguns and things like that create the same sort of thing. There are planes that have tails. There are all sorts of things, as we know, that create birds create this same thing. They have that ability. In planes they can create lifts, so they fly. Planes and birds and things can do that sort of stuff. In rockets and stuff, you have tails and things that create that sort of stuff. A bullet, by nature, a long pointy bullet, a shorter, fatter bullet, they don't have a tail. So what they do is a little bit like gravity. If you ever watch something you try and balance on its nose, it's going to swap end. It's going to fall over, it's going to do. That's exactly what will happen with a bullet, unless there's some other force involved. So the force that I'm talking about that we use is gyroscopic force. This is a force that, for people that understand gyroscopic force, it's if you create spin, you create twist, then you create a ability for something to stay still and stay in one particular orientation. We use it on cars with wheels. We use it on push bikes to make us go forward. A place we've all seen it and we know of it. Here's a spinning top. It has the same problem as a bullet. If I just try and sit it on its nose, it'll fall over. Nothing will do to make that stand up until I impart some gyroscopic force on it. Let's do that. There we have a twist, and you'll notice, even though I didn't spin it very straight, you'll see that it is able to do that to where that gyroscopic force is able to make it stand up straight. Once it eventually gets control of my mess of releasing it, it'll stand up straight until that spin has stopped. It does that through creating a centrifugal force. That centrifugal force goes straight out from where it was imparted, and that makes that stay up straight. To a level, I'll do that again, see if I can get that a little bit straighter. To a level, once again, it's got to sort out my twist, but to a level where it can actually deal with some other forces. It's still going to stand up there. It has to deal with and try and recenter itself and that sort of stuff, but it's actually able to stay up in a form that only its gyroscopic force is able to do that. Now what I've got is a fairly light little item there that I'm managing to impart probably 1500 RPM or something like that. So that's 1500 revs per minute. Let's get back to, away from our spinning top over to our bullet. Here's a little range of bullets. I'll sit up here. Actually, I'll grab a little short fat one and a longer one. These are three different bullets of different sort of looks, similar sorts of weights, but different sizes. And I suppose the other thing to understand, I just mentioned that gyroscopic force is what we're using. What I didn't mention with that is that gyroscopic force changes with more rotation, more mass to create more centrifugal force, and faster RPM to create that more centrifugal force gives us more gyroscopic stability. Now, if we look back at bullets, you'll realise this is not a true indication, but this is still a bit of an idea, that a shorter, fatter bullet, even though they're sitting on their butts, so let's not get too confusing about it. They are sitting on their butt, but it's still, and they're using gravity rather than traveling through the rest of it, but still shorter and fatter is harder to push over, a little bit taller and thinner, easier to push over, really tall and thin, really easy to push over. Well, as much as that's not a mathematically or scientifically brilliant analogy, in the core of it, it is a good analogy because it's exactly how bullets work. The longer they are, the less stable they are, the more spin they need. Now, longer isn't just longer, and largely when you look up your charts and things, you'll realize that largely they're talking about heavier bullets. Heavier bullets need more spin. It's not really true. What it really is talking is about longer, but inherently, generally, a longer bullet is a heavier bullet. It's really about the length of the bullet, but it's a balance of the two things. I won't get too complicated about that, but that does move into when you start talking the difference between a lead core bullet and a monolithic bullet, which means just all copper or all brass or whatever it all is. Having a lighter material it's made out of means that it is also longer versus its weight. So that length versus its weight means it needs more spin. And I suppose that's where I'm heading. I'll cut back to that. What I'm talking about is that the shorter the bullet versus its caliber, the less spin it needs to make it stable. So that's the concept of what we're talking about here. Where do you find it? What this is talking about? What is the spin? What are we actually talking about? Well, we're talking about rifling in a barrel, which means that on whether it's a handgun or it's a rifle, it has a barrel. The barrel has a hole in the middle of it, the bore. Down that hole, we have a thread. For a crude way of looking at it, we have a thread. Whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, however many grooves are there or threads are there, which as the bullet goes down it pushes through these threads, it actually engraves itself a little bit so it has traction, and then it winds itself, it actually has to twist to go with those threads to get out the barrel. The spin and the way we get more or less spin to go with the right spin to suit the bullet is created by the amount of distance it takes to take a rotation of the bullet. So one rotation in X amount of distance. For most of the world, we talk inches. So normally when we talk about twist in a barrel, we talk about 1 in 10 or 1 in 12 or 1 in 8 or 1 in 6 or 1 in 15 or 1 in 17 or whatever it is. It's 1 in something. That 1 in something is one rotation in X amount of inches. So for this situation, let's talk 1 in 12. Fairly average twist. That's what a lot of 308s we find in. Things are starting to get faster nowadays as we shoot longer bullets, and I'll get a little bit into that later on. But let's go with 1 in 12 for that at this moment, which means we have one rotation. So one rotation every 12 inches. Quite a simple thing to check. A lot of barrels will have it written on it. A lot of you'll be able to ask where you buy the rifle and that sort of stuff, or standard things have that sort of stuff. If you want to test, it's quite simple. Get a cleaning rod that is tight so that as you twist it, you can actually see it rotate. So you know that it's in there and it's nice and tight. Pull it up, pull it back so it's in a spot where you know that then you can pull it out and it's going to rotate. You put a mark on there on your cleaning rod. And measure where that is on whether that's in midair or on your rifle or wherever it is. You put a mark on it, you pull it out until that's done one rotation, and that amount of inches, that measurement there is the twist of your barrel. That is a 1 in 1 twist. Most are. There are gain twists, that's another conversation, and I have videos about that side of things, but that's where the twist varies as it goes down there, so a thread that tightens up as it goes towards the muzzle. But at the moment we're talking about a set twist. So we've got a 1 in 12 twist. That's how you measure it. And what we're talking about with a twist is imparting RPM. To get this here, as I mentioned, around 1500 RPM a twist of spin. The twist is to impart that. It doesn't just do that with that measurement. It does that with that plus the speed of our bullet. Fairly simple maths. I'll do it in a very simple equation to make sense of that sort of stuff. If we've got 1 in 12 twist, and we've got, and we know, the next thing we need to know is our bullet speed. So we have a muzzle velocity of, let's say, 3,000 feet per second. And we know from our twist, being 1 in 12 twist, every foot, being 12 inches, is travelled 1 rotation. So that means the very simple maths is we're doing 3,000 revs per second. Minute is what we want to get to because it's RPM, revs per minute. So we times that by 60. There's 60 seconds in a minute. So that means that 3,000 turns into 180,000 RPM. So pretty fast compared to this little thing just spinning at 1,500. Let's round it up to 1,800. We're talking 100 times as fast is how fast we're actually talking about there. So a lot faster. And then you can start to imagine that's a fairly average twist. At 1 in 12, you go down to 1 in 8. We've just gone 1.5 times faster than that. Yes, that's the maths on it. And it's something to keep in mind of what I just said there. 1 in 8, the lower the number, which means the less distance it takes to 1 rotation, is the faster the twist. So in 1 in 8, 1 in 12, if at 1 in 6, that's twice as fast. At 1 in 8, a fairly average twist nowadays, or what runs in a lot of the smaller projectiles in the 6.5 mils and 7 mils and 6 mils, then 1 in 8 is not uncommon. If you've got 3,000 feet per second, your bullet has an RPM of 270,000 RPM. So there's a lot of force there. There's a lot of centrifugal force, which creates a lot of gyroscopic force, which makes, as you can imagine, a lot of stability, and needed for these longer, skinnier bullets. Even though they are nowhere near as big as this bullet, the longer, skinnier bullet is still got that same balance characteristic. So that's where it needs its RPM to get to that place. So listen, that's the basics of spin and why we're doing it and what it's all about. Gyroscopic force to give us stability. The spin is because the bullet isn't stable to start off with, so that gyroscopic force gives us that stability. And the way to work it out, whether you know your twist or you want to check your twist, not a bad thing to do even if you know it. It can be a little bit out, so it can give you a little bit more idea where you're at actually with your rifle. Besides that, it's not really worth overthinking. If you go with what is recommended, but you must understand what that is talking about is that you can't run any bullet in your rifle. If you have a rifle set up for long range shooting and then you want to run a little lightweight bullet out of it for a little hunting bullet, the likes of the 223 is one of the things that can run into that place. There's bullets that you'll get right down at 45 grains in a projectile, and there's bullet weights that are also up in the 75 and 80 grains. The rifle to shoot those two bullets aren't the same. So they are different. There's the same sort of thing with some of with all rifles. 2250 is a classic one for that sort of stuff. Largely got a fairly slow twist because made for shooting in varmints in 55 grains and 45 grains and things, very fast bullets that don't need as much rotation. The moment you want to run a heavier bullet than that, they largely won't stabilize in there because that's not set up that way. So some simple maths, some simple reading instructions, going for what the manufacturer says, and if you stay inside their minimum twist levels and go with the basic advice, you're in the right place. So the next step I want to get into is a little bit more complicated, and that is in the finer levels of twist and where twist goes. What I'm heading into is basically over rotation. Now I don't want to get confused into overstability. That's a different conversation, and no real proof or otherwise of that. But going too fast, putting too much RPM on a bullet is a very possible thing. Now what that basically is about is that the biggest issue you run into it is that in most cases bullets are similar looking to these, where they are lead core bullets. They have a thin copper jacket over a lead core. And what that means is that lead is actually quite fluid. As you know, it's quite malleable, it's quite soft. And if you put too much RPM on a lead, anything malleable, what's going to happen is it's going to eventually distort and change shape. And there are many stories that people have had where they've tried to shoot really light bullets in a 6mm and a 22-250 I mentioned before, but there's lots of stories in all sorts of different calibers. But when they've tried to run a lightweight hunting bullet, or a lightweight bullet of any form, lead core generally, but in a high rotation barrel, a high twist barrel, so that's a low number, so a 1 in 8 or 1 in 6 or something like that. And I've heard stories of they would fire them and there'd be a pop. Just after they fired the thing, there'd be a pop, and sometimes grey mist in front 50 feet down the range of where the bullet was exploding. The bullet was being torn to pieces. And what's actually happening there is your centrifugal forces that are spinning in that bullet are tearing it apart. That lead is just pushing up, and the thin leather, the thin copper jacket can't deal with the force of it. So yes, you can over-rotate a bullet on that form. And once again, staying inside the recommended brackets is easy. There's the other side of that in a couple of things in over-rotation, which are more in the grey area side of things, and that is gyroscopic yaw created by over-rotation. There is a theory, I tend to believe it, and I haven't quite seen it proved. Well, I've sort of a little bit proven it, but basically what we're talking about. This is a place where your centrifugal force is what creates something to stay in the orientation it was spun. If you've ever spelt a high-speed bearing, it's, like I said, what works in the way of keeping something stable from wobbling. What makes this stay up straight is that spin. It doesn't want to change off that line. Now, especially in long-range shooting or extreme long-range shooting, when you have a barrel that's pointing up a little bit to its target, and the bullet's going to have to travel over, up, and then come back down onto target, you ideally want it to change shape to where it actually follows nose to tail. If you've got too much gyroscopic stabilization, in theory at least, what will happen is that means that the bullet will keep traveling in this up angle, even though it starts to go into a down trajectory. As you can imagine, that makes it less efficient traveling through the air. Rather than the smallest profile of going straight through the air, it's actually traveling with its nose up. It makes it less efficient, and in theory, less accurate, because it's got more air pushing it around, that sort of thing, versus straightening back out. So there is a logic to going to, in some cases, going to the minimum twist, the minimum stable place, to make that straighten out. Very much bullet specific, but that's one of the logics that can go with what's gyroscopic yaw. Yaw, by the way, is talking about the bullet not traveling nose to tail. It's traveling off, whether it's the wind causing it, whether it's the stability causing it, whether it's conditions causing it, but yaw is talking about that bullet not traveling in the nose to tail fashion. So gyroscopic yaw is one of the things that can be an issue with over rotation. Two quick little side notes to go with that. One is there are some bullets that need more spin to go out to the ELR ranges, or extreme or ultra long ranges. We're dealing a little bit with going through the transonic zone and the second sonic boom, or the sonic booms it's going to run into as it goes back from supersonic to transonic. We're also dealing with the different characteristics of a bullet traveling at sub-supersonic speeds. So once we go into subsonic speeds, some bullets have more stability issues. This is not across the board. There are some bullets, and generally bullets with less or with characteristics more set up for supersonic travel or other reasons and designs on their bullets, they do need some more rotation to go to that places, or go to those places. In most cases, I've found a good bullet. We try and find a bullet that does both things very well, and then we can go back to running our minimum twist. The other note that raises in that same question is minimum twist and how you actually find that out. Well, the truth is you can do your stability factors, you can do all the math, you can do all the equations until you're blue in the face. The real way to do this is to load some rounds and test. And that's where fairly quickly you'll figure out what's going on with what sort of group's holding down, what sort of consistency is going on. But the way I do it, and the only way I really know to do it for sure, and this is in all cases of verifying that you have enough twist, is to load some bullets up and to shoot them and see what your result is. Anyway, we'll carry on. Another thing, and an old school thought to go with this is, like I said, more old school, but talking about the fact that when you over rotate a bullet, when you've got too much spin on them, even though they don't wobble all over the place in losing control and becoming unstable, is that in theory they can actually have a little bit of an orbit attached to their rotation. So they're a little bit wandery because they're spinning so quickly. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but if you talk to a lot of the old school target shooters, they would also, and even though we're only shooting 600 yards or 800 yards or 400 yards or 1,000 yards, but they would go with the minimum twist out of that logic, that because it's spinning so fast, it creates its own little orbit, or its own little eccentric sort of travel, which means that if you slow it down, you get to a smoother point. And in some fashions, when you watch the spin of some tops in some places, you'll see that there is this point where there seems to be a spin where everything is really, really happy, and that's what they're talking about. Whether that's something of reality or that's something of fantasy, I don't know, but it is one of the old schools of thought. I think, listen, that's the fundamentals of what we're talking about. I'd come back to the basics of what we're talking about with rifles and rifling. To start off with, it is what that's talking about. It means that, yes, if you've got a smooth bore, it's not a rifle, but it means that rifles, handguns, and everything that shoots a bullet needs to create stability to something that isn't stable, traveling through the air without spin. The next bit of it is that, yes, different length largely, we largely see it in weight, but then it's so much more complicated than that, through profiles to what they're made out of, to all sorts of things, center of gravity, all that sort of stuff. It means that they need different spin to suit them, but largely if you go what the manufacturer's recommendations are, and if you're shooting a normal caliber in a normal rifle, it's already been sorted out, but it is part of what's going on there. But it is very relevant, especially if you want to go outside the bubble or when you're changing things and don't know where you're going. It's something to understand. How to check it? Quite simple. Cleaning rod, go through and measure it per inches. That's quite simple. The rest of it beyond that point, listen, they are, like I said, not something to fuss about, not something to be concerned with. It all works fairly simply. It's all straightforward, but it is something to understand, especially once you start to go into hand loading, that you should make sense of it. And keep in mind the fundamental I want to come back to in the way of what twist is, that the faster the bigger the number, the slower the twist. So you really are talking about follow your instructions, go through that side of things. It'll all make sense. Hope they make sense to people in some form or other. It's certainly something that we are still learning about. There's lots to learn about and lots of things when you talk about gyroscopic yaw, when you talk about stabilities, when you talk about transonic zones, and all these things are all inherently in this side of things. But for us, it comes back to the basics of run good bullets, test them, put them in the rifle and shoot them is the easiest way to go through this process. Make sure it works for you. And these are some of the fundamental building blocks. Coming right back to this little spinning top is where the core logic of and how bullets work for us in this world.